Yo, what is up YGOHouse, and welcome back to yet another banger of a video where today we are looking at an updated deck profile on what was actually my first deck profile on the channel, and that is Drytron. Drytron actually received some really good indirect support in both Dynamondo and Choju of the 10 trillion hands, and received a lot of help from the ban list, as now tier elements and graveyard hate is not going to be as common in the main deck as it was before. The lack of bestials and now the limiting of all the Shizu shufflers actually allows Drytron to actually kind of play in this format, and could even be a really solid rogue to tier 2 option, which is what I'm personally hoping for as a Drytron OG. Of course, the deck can still struggle with decks like Branded and even something like Bestial Dragon Link, which will of course be maining the main deck Bestial monsters, but we do have a couple answers in our sideboard as well as our main board to help combat that problem, and so I'm really excited to be able to take a look at what Drytron is in its current state. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, smash that bell, let's go! We of course have to start with the best card in the deck, Drytron Alpha Thuban. This card allows you to search for any ritual monster in the deck by attributing another Drytron or ritual monster. The advantage that this card gives you by searching something like a Cyber Angel Benten on turn 1 is great on its own, but its ability to search something like a Meteona Draconid to close out games going second makes it that much better. Its flexibility allowing you to get that first search of Benten is really strong, and just having this card in the graveyard for follow-up turns really hurts your opponent if they don't have an answer like a Bestial, and now with the shufflers being gone, it's even harder to deal with. Paired with Alpha Thuban is of course 3 copies of Drytron Zeta Aldiba. I'm still not sure how to say that name, but these 2 cards facilitate your full combo, but Zeta is less needed in the grind game. Drytron actually now has multiple ways to search out its ritual spell, and as long as one is in rotation, this card acts as just yet another extender on the crackback, helping you find pieces to ritual summon and find damage to win games. Super important card, these 2 in hand are the most important. You always want to start off with one or the other, but Zeta actually takes a backseat simply due to these new cards that can actually search the ritual spell, but that does not mean you can cut this card down from 3. We do run 2 copies of Gamma, as this card is still the most important piece to your actual combo. The ability to get another Drytron on board for link plays or even Xyz plays is absolutely crucial, but not so crucial that you need to risk breaking on this card by running it at 3. It being searchable via Cyber Emergency or even dumpable off of something like Bubeta or Beatrice means you don't actually have to clog your deck with more copies than 2. For as solid as a card as this is, you just don't want to break on so many Drytron names that you don't see other engine pieces to get your game going, which means you don't want to actually run this card at 3, although it might seem necessary at first. The same can be said for Delta, as we run 2 as well. I was running 1 initially, but I found myself needing more names in my opening hand to truly get my engine going, and having 2 copies makes it consistent enough to see it in your opening hand, but also allows for flexibility by not needing to dump this card mid-combo and wasting either a Beatrice or Bubeta effect on the card. Its drop power is really good, but can conflict with something like Pot of Prosperity, but because its effect is actually optional to draw, you aren't locked out of the effect of this card, making it a perfect extender for the Drytron archetype. For our light fairies, we are actually only on 1 copy of Diviner of the Herald and 1 copy of Choju of the Trillion Hands. Diviner is super important to the deck, but is actually taking a backseat as the dedicated normal summon of the deck. While Diviner can still be normal summoned in bad hands, you often want to wait to use this card for follow-up, or simply going second to dump and Tisk to help break boards. Its flexibility as a starter and board breaker means it's still very important, but due to it being searchable, we don't really need to run multiple copies of the card. Choju of the Trillion Hands is an insane card that came out in floats on Hypernova. As a level 6 body, tributing over Benten to normal summon this card is actually insane. This card allows you to search both a ritual monster and spell on its summon, but also allows you to chain block the Benten trigger in the graveyard. The amount of advantage that this card creates as a searchable normal summon is crazy, and lets you combo much easier in a deck that was formerly limited to 2 to 3 ritual summons a turn. We also run 3 hand traps that are all light fairies, meaning they are all easily accessible through Benten. Herald of Orange Light is by far your best search, as it keeps your combo Nibiru proof, something this deck can't really recover from if they don't respect it. Herald of Greenlight is very strong against decks like Branded to shut down Branded Fusion, so long as they don't have something like Branded Lost up, but stopping spell effects in general is very strong. Artifact Lancia is actually much more important in the current format with Kashtira, as keeping your opponent from banishing actually shuts off a lot of their plays, including something like Riseheart. We do run 1 Mudora in the main deck, something that I was debating on for a long time. At the cost of an extra card in the deck, Mudora still acts as a very powerful interruption against graveyard heavy decks. Having a shuffler available helps you in matchups like Branded and any Tournaments decks you might see even after the ban list. While this card can be an easy side deck card, having this piece of interruption available for free off of Beatrice felt way too good not to include for a deck that actually likes to go first and set up all of its interruptions on its first turn. Cyber Angel Benten was finally freed from the shackles of the Forbidden List not too long ago, and it may have finally have its chance to shine again. This card, as a non-once per turn, searches an incredible amount of hand traps and normal summons in the deck, and actually functions as a decent extender now that it's sitting at 3. Creating advantage is the name of the game for the deck, and being able to do so at such a consistent rate takes it over the top in Drytron's current state. Of course, being able to search any light fairy is absolutely key, but it being level 6 allows you to go into something like a Beatrice play, and even some synchro plays if you are running different variants of the deck. Cyber Angel Natasha and Edith 10 both serve very specific functions and take the deck to another level. Edith 10 is very good for an extender into further ritual plays because it actually recurs the Meteonis Drytron in your graveyard, but also helps your monsters push for game by giving an extra 1k attack to your ritual monsters if it's tributed. Natasha is the going second goddess, allowing you to steal your opponent's monsters and even helps win in time. Neither of her effects are a hard once per turn, meaning if you want to, you can actually steal 2 or even 3 of your opponent's monsters very easily in a single turn. This allows you to clear stronger monsters by using them for your own link summons, making killing your opponent that much easier. We are attempting the Chaos Mac lock in this build, as it is far easier than what I first believed. Magician of Black Chaos Max allows you to tribute any card, including itself, to trigger its on-field effect to lock your opponent out of monster effects for an entire turn. With the addition of Dino Mondo in the extra deck, this is easily done on your opponent's turn to blank them from those monster effects. Chaos Max is easily searchable and dumpable, so long as you can ritual summon this monster on your first turn, you can actually set one of the nastiest plays up that Drytron has ever seen, keeping your opponent from being able to do anything as you kill them on the crackback. Drytron Meteonis Draconids feels a lot less important than it used to be, but don't sleep on this card's viability and versatility. Being an easy machine monster to tribute for ritual summons is already strong, but having the option to go for a 4k monster that has targeting protection from monster effects, can swing at all of your opponent's special summon monsters, and clears 2 monsters off the board on your opponent's turn is just ridiculous. This card is very relevant in the current meta, as Tearlaments effects won't trigger in the graveyard as often as they used to, meaning it can act as a really good board wipe against something like Kashtira, Sprite, and any deck that needs 2 monsters on the field to actually be able to play. For our support spells, we have of course the honorary Drytron card Cyber Emergency at 3. This searches any Drytron name and can even come back to hand should the activation of this card be negated. While that isn't very common, it's just something to keep in mind on a card that's going to give you full access to your engine, something that is absolutely necessary in a deck that is at 42 cards at the moment. Drytron Nova is easily the best Drytron card, and cutting it down to 2 really hurt, but there's really no need to risk bricking on multiples. While this card essentially searches a Drytron name and gives you an extra body to link summon with Linkuriboh, its susceptibility to Ash Blossom makes it not worth running at 3 in the current meta, as well as having other cards that can even search it. The way we are able to search our copy of Drytron Nova is our 2 copies of Drytron Fafnir. Fafnir searches any Drytron spell, allowing you to have a 3rd copy of both Nova and Meteonis, but its effect to lower a level of a monster is actually very relevant to the Kashtira and Sprite matchups, both decks that I expect to see heavy representation in the next format. Overall, this card is very good, and has remained a key part to the deck as we move forward with Drytron, definitely a card you need to be seeing in your opening hand if possible. We do run 2 copies of Meteonis Drytron instead of just 1. The fact we have access to both copies on turn 1 is now super relevant, but the importance of opening this card in wonky hands can actually be a plus. Opponents will side Troll, main Ash, and some decks will still have the Ishizu Shufflers to contend with. Not relying on a single copy to get your deck to function is a no-brainer, even with Graveyard Hate being a little less common after the ban list. To round off our support spells, we have 3 copies of Preparation of Rites. This card helps you build your board into an Underworld Goddess line, and helps fix consistency in hands by getting Benten. It's ridiculously good in your deck, and actually might be your 2nd best searcher, which makes it an absolute no-brainer to have at 3. Our 1 non-engine hand trap is Infinite Impermanence, a very strong hand trap in the current meta. Imperm, similar to Ash, has use against practically every deck in the format, but its versatility is much needed in the deck. Being a hand trap is good enough, but it can actually function as a strong going 2nd card to spot negate an opponent's monster in draw phase, opening up your plays. Imperm ultimately felt like the most versatile card to place in this slot, as I opted not to go for as many board breakers as I used to in this current build. Part of the reason why we don't have as many board breakers is because of Triple Tactics Thrust. Thrust is a very strong card in Drytron, giving you ways to search Cyber Emergency, Drytron Nova, or even Preparation of Rites. The two best options to search, however, are Triple Tactics Talents and Pot Prosperity. If your opponent should be playing Branded, they are more than likely have Bestials in their main deck. I personally expect Branded to be popular not only at my locals, but at bigger events as well, meaning you can punish that Bestial by getting into Pot of Prosperity, finding combo pieces, ripping a card out of the hand with Tactics, or even drawing 2 with the Tactics as well. Most of the time, if you're looking for draw power, Pot of Prosperity is much better as you dig deeper into the deck, but should you open something like Delta, you may opt for Tactics to rip cards, or steal that Bestial instead. Rounding off the main deck is Foolish Burial, which is just another Drytron name essentially, allowing you to fix dead hands. This card does provide versatility by dumping Mudora as well should you already have access to your Drytron package, making it very strong even in a 42 card deck. Our extra deck is a little different than before, but Mubeta Fafnir remains as the most veteran player in the deck. This card is what allows Drytrons to function, and summoning both on turn 1 is actually something you may find yourself needing to do. This card's versatility with its spell Trap Negate is also really good, although it doesn't come up very often. Lyrilusc Assembled Nightingale is an easy way to get into your Zeus, as you can attack your opponent directly with the card, and Downart Magician of course gives you an extra material to that Zeus, allowing you to make a 4-mat Zeus, aka having 2 ways to be able to clear board. Very necessary in this extra deck in order to flex against decks like Kashtira. Beatrice and Zeus are staples in Drytron. Beatrice gives you even easier access to your names, but foolishing any card in the deck is just so strong. Setting up something like Mudora for additional disruption, or even getting more names for follow-up is really solid. Zeus acting as the best counter to Kashtira makes it an absolute necessity, and a card I would run it to should I actually have 2 copies. Our Link package is fairly standard, and Link Karibo is our choice for a Link 1, acting as an extender in hands with Drytron Nova. Herald of Mirage Lights is a very solid spell negate is a Link 2, but requiring 2 Drytron names or 2 Light Fairies makes it a little bit more difficult to summon. Dynamondo, however, is essentially Sprite Elf on steroids for ritual-based decks. Going second, it can act as a Nightmare Unicorn, shuffling both any card on your opponent's field and a ritual monster in your graveyard into the deck. It can also tag itself out for any properly summoned ritual monster in the graveyard, allowing you to access that Chaos Mac lock even in your opponent's draw phase, dodging things like Valor, although of course you're doing it on your opponent's turn, so it wouldn't matter anyways. IP Masquerena and Nightmare Unicorn go hand in hand, as IP gives you options on your opponent's turn to provide disruption, and Unicorn shuffling in yet another card is very strong. IP remains really solid for your Underworld Goddess lines as well, as being able to snatch up one of your opponent's monsters can be very crucial in order to break their board. Access Code Talker is the Link 4 of choice to push for game, being easily accessible even without Nightmare Unicorn in rotation. Drytrons flood the board so easily that you can get this guy out very early to push for an OTK. Underworld Goddess is definitely more situational, but in moments where you can link off your IP with one of your opponent's monsters to make it, you can shut an entire game down. Its effect on field is very good as well against a multitude of matchups, and it's always funny when you summon 4 Drytron names, your opponent waits for you to do something crazy, and then you just link off one of their monsters to go into Underworld Goddess. Herald of the Arclight and Elder Entity and Tis remain your diviner of the Herald targets in the deck. While you do lose access to these cards in a grind game, Diviner doesn't feel as necessary anymore, making the one dump perfectly fine for the deck going forward. In fact, most of the time you will use these in a grind game, as your typical first turn will go for Choju, and your turn 2 will go for Diviner, helping you crack boards and win games. For our side deck, we do have the 1 copy of Vanity's Ruler. This was of course a main deck staple a couple of formats ago, but the special summon lock just isn't as strong this format. While it is a very good option, you don't really need to side this card unless you're finding yourself needing to shut down a deck like Kashtira, which can't really survive without its special summons. You could make the argument to move this back into the main instead of Mudora, but the value of a shuffler in game 1 is a little more versatile than the special summon lock, which is easy to stop with a Dark Ruler no more or any spot negate. I also decided to test out the new spell Gravekeeper's Inscription. Bestials will still be in the side deck of several decks, and keeping your first turn safe from Bestials is actually very strong. The other 2 effects will literally lose you the game, so this is the only thing to help with Bestials. While you could run something like Ghost Spell, the lingering effect actually helps beats deck like Branded and even hurts Kashtira, forcing them to use your hand to special summon cards like Scareclaw Kashtira or even Tier Elements Kashtira. We do have 2 more copies of Triple Tactics talent as well to help in games where hand traps are relevant, as well as being extremely good going second. Drawing into more cards never hurts, but sealing yet another monster can be just as valuable when looking for an OTK, and ripping out something like a board breaker if you're going first can be just as strong as well. Lightning Storm is yet another thrust target to help break boards. Destroying all monsters or all back row is devastating in a meta where a deck like Labyrinth may be more prevalent. This card gives the versatility of being a board wipe for either, and that value is just too insane to pass up on in a card that's actually searchable. Harpy's Feathered Duster remains the best card for purely back row, and it is again searchable off of Thrust, making it really solid for back row heavy matchups. Evenly Matched is easily the best going second card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now from a generic perspective. Forcing an Omni Negate on this card is actually really good, as Drytron naturally plays well going second with Natasha in rotation. Of course, if this card resolves, it nukes most of your opponent's board, making it hard to play against the Drytron engine. Being searchable off of Thrust makes it even easier to use as well. For our going first Thrust targets, a Pointer of the Red Lotus and Dimensional Barrier are really strong. Lotus allows you to further protect your board by ripping blowout cards, but also allows you to know exactly when and where to use your interruption to stop your opponent's turn. This has been a staple in every Drytron deck that I've played, and it being searchable makes it so much better now that it's limited. D-Barrier fell off a little bit last format, as very few decks actually decided to side this card, but with Despia making a comeback alongside Kashtira, D-Barrier can shut down those decks that lock themselves into one summoning mechanic for a whole turn, and help you keep your interruptions for those blowout cards and win games. That is going to wrap up the deck profile portion of the video, but remember to stay tuned for a quick combo that will show you exactly how you can do the Chaos Max Lock and even set yourself up with 3 to 4 negates in hand. So now we are at the combo portion of the video where I'm going to show you the pretty standard Alpha Zeta line. This combo was heavily inspired by Logan JYA, aka the Drykage. Please show him some love, I'll link his channel down below. We're just going to go ahead and jump into this. This is pretty standard. We're going to start with Alpha tributing Zeta. This will allow us to, of course, search out our copy of Benten. Then we can use the Zeta in the graveyard to tribute the Benten to special summon the Zeta. This will allow us to search the Meteonis Drytron off of the Zeta, and then we can actually go ahead and search the new Choju of the Trillion Hands off of our Benten. We can go ahead and overlay here for a copy of Mu Beta Fafnir, which will allow us to dump down our copy of Gamma to the graveyard. Then we can go ahead and use the Meteonis Drytron, tributing off one of our material, to grab ourselves the Benten. This is where our new normal summon comes into play. Normally you would have tributed with Gamma the Benten in order to extend, but you can actually extend even further without actually using that Gamma yet, so you can just go Choju, and here you can go Chainlink 1 Choju, Chainlink 2 Benten. So Benten as Chainlink 2 is going to grab your copy of Herald of the Orange Light. This is super important because it makes your combo, of course, Nibiru proof, and then we can grab off of the Choju, we can go ahead and grab our copy of, if we can find it, our Meteonis Drytron, and of course another copy of Cyber Angel Benten, because Benten is cracked as a non-once per turn. Here we can actually use the Meteonis if we wanted to, but we typically don't want to actually do that here. We can actually just go for a Gamma here. You can do a couple things. You can ritual summon out the Benten here, but we're going to go for Gamma, tributing the Benten in our hand in order to special summon itself. And of course the Zeta that we used earlier. This is kind of optional. It doesn't really matter that much. This does allow us to get another search off of Benten though. And here we have the Herald of Orange Light, so you can kind of pick and choose what you want. You might go for Benten depending on your hand, because you can get another tribute, say if you have something like a Delta in rotation, or you could go for something like an Artifact Lancia against decks like Branded or even Kashtira. So here we're just going to go for the Lancia just for an example. We're then going to use the Meteonis in our graveyard to reduce either one of these by 1,000 to add it back to our hand. Then we can use the copy of Meteonis Drytron to tribute out this one material for our other copy of Benten. So I'm running out of a little bit of room, so Benten will just chill up here like that. Obviously that's not how you would want to do it. We're going to go ahead and exceed though. for our copy of Beatrice, Lady of the Eternal. Then we can go ahead and activate Beatrice's effect, detaching the Benten, in order to send our copy of the Magician of Black Chaos Max. So this is actually how we get this card into rotation. We're going to go ahead and exceed for another copy of Bubeta Fafnir, because it's actually really important to have the material to ritual summon with. So we can just use Meteonis Drytron to tribute out both of these materials in order to go into our copy of Magician of Black Chaos Max. Now here you can link two. You can link two for Herald of Mirage Lights if you want. If you again have some extenders, IP Masquerena might be a play here. If you think you need like an unicorn line, but just for the standard combo, I guess we'll go for the Mirage Light. And the reason why the Mirage Light is so good is because you're already locking your opponent out of monster effects, right? So now you just want to spell Trap Negate. You want to be able to answer those cards. So we can link these two off for the super broken Dynamondo. So this card is actually kind of broken. Again, it allows you to recur a Magician of Black Chaos Max on your opponent's turn. So as soon as they hit their draw phase, you can activate the Dynamondo to tribute itself in order to bring back the Magician of Black Chaos Max. This will allow you to trigger his effect on field. He will tribute himself to then attempt to lock your opponent out of monster effects. Now this is really good because he actually tributes as cost, so you still dodge things like infinite impermanence unless they hit it immediately on the summon of Dynamondo, but your resolution is Chain Link 1 as turn player. You're going to be able to tribute this as cost, which is super huge. You avoid things like imperm, and you avoid things of course like Valor because you're doing it on your opponent's turn. This doesn't look like a lot of interruption, but this is actually really solid. You have a Spell Trap Negate, or a Monster Effect Negate, or an ability to lock your opponent from being able to banish cards. You've locked yourself out of, your opponent, out of monster effects for an entire turn. That is super, super strong. That is pretty much your standard setup, but I am going to run a quick test hand in order to show you exactly what this deck can really do. So we're going to go ahead and pull a test hand here. Seeing Alpha Zeta is already insane. Natasha and a Benten. So this is like a god hand, to be honest with you. This is insane. Even if they ash the Alpha Thuban, as soon as they see you tribute Benten, they're not going to want to ash. So I'm going to move the cards down here to where you can kind of just see the top of them and try to work from there. So we're going to go Alpha, of course, tributing the Benten. This will allow us to search another copy of the Benten off of the Alpha Thuban, and then the Benten will trigger, allowing us to add the Choju. So this is pretty much standard. If you have Benten in hand, you still just want to go for Benten. We'll use Zeta here, tributing the second copy of Benten in our hand in order to search for our Meteonis Drytron. And then of course the Benten will trigger again, and here you might just want to go for the Herald of Orange Light just to have it. You want to search this pretty much as early as possible. We already have a monster in hand that we can use the effect with. So essentially these two cards we're not going to worry about for the rest of the combo. We're going to try to hold those and play with just these three cards. We're going to go ahead and exceed for a copy of Bubeta Fafnir, which will of course dump down our copy of Gamma. We can use Meteonis Drytron, tributing one of our materials in order to grab one of our copies of Cyber Angel Benten from the graveyard. Then we contribute over the Benten for the Choju, Chain Link 1, Chain Link 2. Here you probably just start grabbing some of your hand traps off of Benten, because you just have so much access with the Choju in your hand that it doesn't really matter. We're going to go for another copy of Benten and a Meteonis Drytron. We still have one name to resolve, being Gamma, so it doesn't hurt to have an extra search off of Benten. This is why this card is so broken. This non-once return, being able to just recycle this card is insane. I'm actually going to go ahead and activate Gamma to tribute off the Benten in our hand, special summoning itself, as well as the material we used earlier, which will again trigger our Benten. Here we're going to go ahead and grab the Herald of Greenlight. So again, we have plenty of effects to be able to activate. This actually helps diversify our end board a little bit here, because we have ways to discard both and activate both Herald of Greenlight and Orange Light. So you might want to be a little bit more conservative with how you use something like Lancia. This is really, really strong, and you don't have to necessarily go into Herald of Mirage Lights in a board like this, which is pretty interesting as well. From here, you probably still want to go into your second copy of Bubeta Fafnir. You don't necessarily have to. You can honestly link these two away if you felt like it was necessary to go for something like an IP, which is what we'll do, I guess, to show you that you can just end on different types of boards. You don't have to go for that standard combo every single time. So we're going to go ahead and put our IP here. Going to go ahead and activate the Medionis Drytron to tribute off the alpha for a copy of Benten. Benten will allow us to exceed into Beatrice. You can then use Beatrice's effect here in order to dump down our delta. What you could have done and what I should have done, which I forgot, is use Medionis on either one of the two that we linked for IP. So we'll still have access to Medionis. You could do it now still and just do it for the new beta. So it'd still be legal. But you kind of want to do it beforehand because you want to have access to be able to go Medionis Drytron here, tributing off this move beta for 2000 attack in order to go into Benten one more time. The only reason why we would want to do that is because it allows us to actually get into Delta, tributing this off. It gets us another search. We can reveal a ritual monster to draw a card, so we get another imperm. Of course, that's not always going to happen, but this allows us to actually search for something for follow-up. So we already have Natasha in hand, so we can search either Editen or Diviner of the Herald. Both of these are really solid options at this point. You do have quote-unquote 4 materials on board. You have a Nightmare Unicorn on board. You can... It's not bad. Like, not going into Dynamondo definitely sucks, but this is like more conservative. You don't have to necessarily kill your whole hand. Of course, we drew into 2 Imperm. That's not always going to happen. But this is a really solid hand. Like, this would be an end board that I wouldn't be happy with necessarily. So we do have something like a Nightmare Unicorn to be able to use, and we have so much follow-up. So this leaves your hand not as susceptible, and your board not as susceptible to being cracked, because something like a... You know, the monster lock is good, but if you don't want to push all of your resources into that lock, you can play something like this. This is not the most optimal line. Again, I do want to stress that this is not the most optimal, because again, you would rather be able to put out that monster lock, but even with something like Beatrice, you could put something like, let's see, you put something like Mudora out on field. So, conservative, very conservative test hand, but I think it's a good example to show you that if you don't want to go for that standard line of play, there's still different ways to do it. I'm sure I messed up a little bit, and there are even things that I could have done better, but that's just a quick test hand to show you that you can fill your hand up. I mean, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 searches in one turn, which is absolutely insane, plus 2 imperm, so really solid test hand. As you can see, this deck definitely still has a lot of potential in the current meta to be very, very powerful and create some sneakily scary end boards. So that is going to do it for our Drytron deck profile today, as well as a combo tutorial and a quick little test hand to show you that you can actually do some things that are a little bit different with this deck rather than going for the same combo every time. I really enjoy that Drytron might be playable again. I do plan on taking this deck to locals and giving you guys some reports on how the deck actually plays in person, so be on the lookout for some updated deck profiles and even some vlogs, potentially some footage from locals. I'm very excited to be able to really play again in person. If you guys enjoyed, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Everybody is welcome in the YGOHouse. Peace, y'all.